So welcome to The Artist's Voice, Amy Sherald and Devan Shimoyama. My name is Nico Whedon. I'm the Director of Public Programs and Community Engagement here at the museum. So I first just want to thank people. I see people from like far distances that are in the room, so thank you for coming out tonight. And just to give you just a quick overview of what to expect today, we're going to have a brief introduction from the exhibition Fiction's curators, Hallie, Ringle, and Connie, Choi. And then we're going to open it up to a more open dialogue. And because their work is on view upstairs, we're going to conclude the program by walking outside up the stairs and into the galleries so we can actually see the work up close and personal. And then we'll all go home, eat dinner, and have a nice night. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for coming out. My name's Connie. I'm the co-curator of fiction. I'm the associate curator of the permanent collection here.
I'm Hallie, Ringle. I'm assistant curator here at the museum. I'm also co-curator of fictions with Connie.
We're so grateful that you came out tonight. What day is it today? Thursday? We hope you got a chance to see fictions before the talk tonight, but if not, as Nico said, there's time after the program to go upstairs and take a look at specifically Devan and Amy's paintings, but also the rest of the works in the show. Fictions is the fifth in a series of exhibitions that the Studio Museum has done, starting in 2001 with Freestyle, and the last one was Fore, which was in 2012. This is a series of emerging artist exhibitions that looks at the contemporary moment and takes a survey of the artistic production of artists of African and Latinx descent across the country. So this time around, we were very lucky to have 19 artists from places as diverse as LA, Austin, Baltimore, Maryland, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Detroit, Chicago, represented in this exhibition. It is the last exhibition series that will be in this building, so we're all very excited and grateful and kind of looking forward to the next step as we move forward. Fictions really started with Hallie and I looking at emerging artists that we knew and loved but hadn't worked with before, but then also getting recommendations from our colleagues and seeing what was being exhibited in galleries and other institutions around the country. We did a lot of studio visits, over 70. This included traveling around the country, but also doing a lot of Skype visits, and we did Skype visits with both Amy and Devan. So that was interesting for us to finally be able to see the works in person when they came to be installed in the museum. So we're very lucky to have both Amy and Devan here, but also to just engage in a larger discussion about portraiture and painting and the exhibition as a whole. So again, this is going to be very organic, free form. We're going to be really in conversation with each other, and then there'll be time for questions after. Okay.
So Devan and Amy, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you.
Very excited to be in conversation with you tonight. And we really want to start off the conversation by thinking about what first drew us to your work, which are your very interesting palettes. We love the way that you're thinking about race and skin tones through these fictional colors. So, John, mind talking about that a little bit more?
Sure, no worries. So the painting that I have in the show here is part of a larger body of work of black barbershop paintings, portrait paintings primarily. The colors that I use kind of stem from, I often I'm a big hoarder with materials and objects and things like that, and so a lot of them obviously come with their own colors that already are imbued in the materials, and so sometimes I use that to start and give me a palette idea. As far as the painting that's upstairs, it's a lighter-skinned black male, and that was the first. Before making this body of work, I primarily worked in self-portraiture, so actually painting someone lighter-skinned kind of changed the palette for me a lot in terms of what I could do. I often, when I start my paintings, will render the figure as I see them in whatever pretty normative lighting conditions as you can imagine in a barbershop, and that's through colored pencil, and then often I will paint a glaze over top with a gradient in oil paint, and so that a lighter skinned individual actually allowed me to, it was hard at first, this was the first one that's upstairs that was of a light skinned person, and so I was able to really play with color a little bit with less surprise, I guess, because, just naturally that interaction is a little bit more true to the color that I was mixing. As far as the playfulness in the color, I think that stems out of, I don't know, really wanting to queer that space, that barbershop, and really, for a while I had been using color to locate actual temperature regions in the body, and so sometimes areas would get really hot in tone depending on where they were located, so sometimes fingertips, noses, mouths, things like that are usually pretty hot in that painting. As the gradient goes down the face, it's pretty orange and warmer towards the mouth, and so I think of that as locating temperature regions in the body.
For me, I always say that my approach to painting, I'm not really thinking about specifically what I'm doing. I'm thinking about what I'm doing, but so when I think about why I use so much color, I think about the journey that got me to this body of work, and I used to spend a lot of time in Panama. I used to spend my summers there, and the palette there really had, the colors there really influenced me. And so I can't directly relate the colors that I use to that experience, but I think, the work that I make is the culmination of my journey from the time that I was a baby until this present moment, and all those things kind of come into play. So I'm not really thinking about words or specific things when I'm making a painting. I think all those things come after that for me. Is there an image that we can? Yeah, so the backgrounds for me are something that I like to play around with a lot of color, and I usually decide that after I figure out what the model is going to be wearing. So that's the first decision that I make, is what colors are they going to have on, and that oftentimes changes. So this dress was actually blue, and the flowers were different colors, and I changed it to green, and then I decided to make the background orange. So sometimes the background will change 2 or 3 times before the end of the painting because the colors of the clothes change. So I do put a lot of thought into it, and it's really just all intuitive. And then as far as the skin is concerned, when I had, you can, yeah. When I had first kind of landed on these ideas of what I wanted to do, I spent a lot of time not painting, and I also spent a lot of time post-graduate school trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to paint. And I started to look at a lot of movies and different photographs and things like that. But in oil painting, they usually start the figure, the underpainting in gray. And I just realized that aesthetically it looked really great. Like I did it, the first painting I did it in, I had started in with the brown washes to make the complexion brown, and then I decided it was something that I didn't want to do. And so the second painting, the background was red. The model had on like a white tank top and a skirt that had different colors in it. And she was a dark brown complexion, and it just looked beautiful. So it was an aesthetic decision at first that, looking back, it's a comment on the construction of race itself. Yeah.
And how are you finding your models? Are they people that you know, or people that you're...
Some of them are people that I know. This one, the young lady is my assistant. I've actually painted her twice, but you wouldn't know. I changed her hair. She didn't have any hair there, and I gave her an afro. A lot of times, I just have to be out in the world, living at the grocery store, at the airport, and I see a particular kind of person. So I always say, like, there could be a room full of 100 people, and there might be 2 people in the room that I might consider what I'm looking for. And it's really hard to describe what that is, but it's something where they have like an intersection of the past, the present, and the future. meeting inside of them or something. There's a sense of awkwardness about them, and there's something that I can see in their eyes that I know will transcend the piece as I'm painting it. And it's really hard to describe. It's like how you feel when you saw your soulmate. I don't know. That's the best way I can describe it. It's like you see somebody and like something clicks. You're like, do I know you? Have we met before? So it's like that.
And Devan, how about for you? Because I know most of your work before this was self-portraiture, so this is a new practice. Like
Yeah, so the new body of work that's not of me, they're all of different individuals. Some of them, so it's, as you can see, this is a friend of mine actually, a close friend of mine in Pittsburgh, and this is the person that actually sort of started the idea for this entire body of work for this these new barbershop paintings that I've been working on. So this is before the new body of work that I have going on right now. But most of the time, the other people that aren't me are either people that I have encountered. So some of them are halfway made up. They're a lot of these paintings are partially taken from found images. I contact other barbers. They often have books full of other people's hair that they cut to show potential customers. And so I'll ask them to use some of those images. Sometimes I'll see people out and about, or I'll sneak pictures, zoom in super close to somebody to get something, and then, and when I do that, I end up with a pretty low resolution file, and then I'm able to sort of extrapolate what I can in terms of details and sort of augment things as I go along. So they're a little bit, they're half fictitious, half real. So a lot of the people are inspired or influenced by actual people that I've encountered, but they become this kind of hodgepodge new being through the process of like actually rendering the person.
And just in terms of when you do choose a subject from life, like how do you talk to them? How do you approach them? Are you asking them to come in, sit for? I know you speak a lot of photos, but like, is there a conversation that happens? Will you ask for consent?
I'm not super. I mean, it depends. I ask for consent when it comes to using images that somebody else has taken themselves, or if I see an image on someone's Instagram from a barber or something, I'll contact them and ask, can I use this? Generally, it doesn't end up looking exactly like that person anyway. If I'm painting somebody that actually is a rendition of that specific person, I know them usually, so I feel more comfortable actually talking to them in person. I'll have them come into my studio and we do a full-on like photo shoot, and I like to have, of myself, I probably have hundreds and hundreds of images in different positions and things like that, so I can just sort of freely take from them, because a lot of my paintings are made, the way that I make them, there's actually a large digital component before I even actually go into creating the painting. So I often make these paintings in digital collage and things like that, like on my phone and different applications or in Photoshop. And so I do a lot of augmenting there, figuring out color palettes and where certain materials will go, because inherently through the process of the way that I paint using so many different mediums, certain things just can't be done. It has to be done in a specific order, and I kind of have to know how to make the painting before I go into it. So it's the sort of free painterly moments actually happen within contained, predetermined shapes and forms.
When you're, photographing people in your studio, or you're finding people that you're really connecting with, I imagine that's quite an intimate connection and an intimate moment with them. Are you continuing these relationships? Are you speaking with them afterwards? Do they have requests for how you're showing them, or?
I tend to stay in touch with the kids that I photograph. I mean, I stay in touch with everybody, but there's specifically younger kids that I may have worked with in Baltimore, or there's one young lady, I don't know whether the image is there, but it's the one with the yellow background. Her name is her name is Morgan, and I met her in Patterson Park. I have a dog, and she asked me to play with my dog. And she was 10 years old at the time, so you kind of have to be careful in that approach. And luckily, I saw her in this dress, and I knew that I just had to have her And so, I was just talking to her like how, what's your favorite subject in school? And she's like, well, my favorite subject is math. And she said, and I like reading, but I'm not sure what else they can teach me because I read at a college level. And I was like, you read at a college level? And so I went to find her mom and I introduced myself and I'm like, I'm an artist. And I said, like an artist. And I said, I have work here and here. And she's like, oh, okay. And I said, I'd like to paint your daughter. So I went to her house to photograph her. The whole family was there. Everybody came outside to watch. And so I ended up photographing her and her siblings, just like giving some photographs to the mom. But then I for some reason I felt like I should stay and spend more time with her. So I went in and we played video games and stuff like that. And I was ready to leave and she started to cry and she like wanted to hang out with me. And I'm like, her mom's not gonna let her come with me because we just met like a week ago. She's like, no, it's fine. And I was like, so I hung out all day that day. And I was supposed to hang out with some friends to go to a bar later. And so I'm like, okay, so I have to take you home now because I'm going to a bar. And she said, I can go to the bar too. I'll just play video games on my phone while you have a drink. And I'm like, you can't do that. So I definitely stay in touch with her. And actually the collector who bought this painting actually gave her $500 for a summer program for her to be a part of, which is really sweet. Yeah.
So one of the things that also drew Hallie and I to your works is that in the works that are in the show, none of the subjects are actually looking directly at the viewer. And I know, Devan, a lot of times you cover the eyes with different embellishments, and then for some reason, Amy, the two paintings that we chose for you, both of the eyes are obscured, whereas I know in a lot of your other works, they're directly confronting the viewer. Can you talk a little bit about that? Yeah.
So the make-believer, I painted her eyes open, I painted them closed, I painted them open, I painted them closed.
On the same thing.
Not, because it bothered me because I'd never done it before. But then I just kind of made peace with it and then I painted them closed again. And so now they're closed. But it changed so many times because I wasn't sure how powerful it would be without the gaze, because the gaze is so important to me. But it actually really works, and I think it's because of her body language. I think that made up for it.
I think there's something powerful in withholding
Yeah.
the audience too.
Yeah.
That you're tapping into.
So, and as far as the boy with no past, you can see a little bit of his eyes, but this painting is more about a dream and more about his body being a vessel and more about, what Black masculinity would be like without all the external directives, So he's like ready to blast off into another now, so I really didn't think about it as much with this one as I did with Make Believer.
For me, in most of my paintings, I've been obscuring eyes for a long time with a lot of different materials. Initially, a lot of refractive materials, so rhinestones and bejeweled things or pieces of actual jewelry. And for a while, I was doing so much self-portraiture that I wanted a way for it to not be so much about specifically me or my own lived experience necessarily, because I was really painting a fantasy. All of these paintings were more so representing some almost like my own personal mythology for the queer Black male, and so I wanted to obscure that in some way. But then I started to think about the eyes as an entry point in which so now it sort of transforms me into a surrogate in which, like sort of what you were saying, a vessel in which someone can then insert themselves into that body, this shamanistic type character that is exposing tiny moments of magic. And then moving into the Barbershop series, I still think of them as kind of like superhuman in some capacity. They're not quite just regular individuals, and so I wanted that to be something that continued on from the other series of paintings. So again, like a lot of these paintings have eyes where you can, if you go up close enough, you'll see yourself mirrored or reflected a number of times, or a lot of different materials. And then I remember I made one painting without any eyes, and everybody I got a call from someone saying, "Oh, this painting's not done," or something like that. They were panicking, and I was just like, oh, I don't know. Sometimes I just, what's the conceptual meaning behind this? And they wanted some really deep, long, thought-out thing as soon as I one time to not put adorned eyes on something. So it's funny now. It's like almost an expectation. But a lot of times when you do see eyes in my paintings, they're either they're eyes that are from women. So sometimes they're my mother's eyes or my aunt's eyes, and so I grew up surrounded by women. I was raised by my grandmother, my mother, my aunt, my great-grandmother, and so that's always kind of been an important relationship to me. And so that's usually when you see non-adorned eyes. They're still not even my eyes.
We also really love the titles that you both use. They're beautiful titles. Amy, can you talk a little bit about how you come to your sort of naming convention?
Well, I had a friend. So like when I think like the third painting in, the Studio Museum had something. It was like they were like pairing an artist with a poet. And then paired me with this poet named Shannon Robinson, and she wrote this poem that she actually reposted on Instagram today. I hadn't seen it since like 2008. This is 2008. And in that poem, there was a line that I picked out, because the poem was about her and I, and it was well prepared and maladjusted. And I just finished this painting. I'm like, this is a perfect name for this painting. And so after that, I was like, I have to follow this up with like something even better, So that kind of, that really got me started. But my sister is the writer in the family, and so oftentimes when I couldn't do it, I started to rely on her. So I would like text her the images, usually too late, because like I just texted her the last 3 I just finished like 2 days ago. I'm like, give them to me now. But she and I go back and forth with it, and then sometimes she just doesn't get it, and so I usually I buy a lot of poetry books, and I read through different lines, and usually 3 or 4 words will come together that resonate with what it is that I'm trying to say, because I really feel like if I had to name them myself, it would take me a year to do it, because I need that much time to process it, I think, and just like really be present with what I did, But she did name this one Make Believer. She did not name that one, and that's why it's named after a whole Lucille Clifton poem. I mean, the whole poem. And did I name this one? I think she named this one. This one is what's precious inside of him doesn't care to be known by the mind of those that diminish his presence. And then they're really good at putting in parentheses, All-American. And I think this one was one of those, I was reading through a book, and I saw something that said try on dreams. And so it's try on dreams until I find the one that fits me. They all fit me. And this one is the clear, unspoken, and granted magic. And this one is the light is easy to love. And this is also an internet title. It's called my internet titles. What's different about Alice is that she has an incisive way of telling the truth. I usually can't.
I can't do that.
And does it make sense mostly in her mind? And that's the studio music, yeah. And that one was all things bright and beautiful. So that one I had to name myself, and I couldn't figure it out in time, and I ended up naming it Pupa, which is the most, I don't like it. And so I sat with it for a year. It's just a weird name, it's larva, and I was like, I don't know. So I just changed the title of that one last month. I finally figured it out. And I had to let the collectors know.
I don't know, like, if you went through this is just titled Anthony, that's his name. I'm not very poetic or creative. I don't remember. Oh, no, wait. This one's called Before the Strike. I think sometimes they're named after an action or something that's going on in the painting, or a lot of times they're named way after I've made it, and right when I have to, because it's going into a show or something, so a lot of times it's last minute. This is Moon Twin, so it's named again after something compositional. Butterfly Eater, I think. It's pretty self-explanatory in a lot of them, but so the recent series, the Barbershop series, a lot of them are named after, I made this playlist full of a bunch of different albums that I've been listening to in the studio, and so a lot of the titles come from that. I don't remember that one, to be honest. But I named a few of them. One of the largest paintings in my show that's up at Debuck Gallery right now is named Control, but stylized in the way that SZA's album is titled. What I'm really interested in, and a lot of the titles for that show specifically, some of them being titled from Devontae Hines songs or from Kalela, different artists like that. I think people who celebrate either some sort of over-the-top or some kind of intricate black queerness in some capacity, or femininity, and I think SZA does that a lot. There's this real affinity for queer or gay men towards the black female diva, and I always found that really a fascinating relationship dynamic, just historically. And so I thought to really make that contemporary was just, let me just take these titles straight from what I'm listening to now, versus, as opposed to what was actually being played in a lot of the barbershops that I had visited, which were Steve Harvey reruns, and like Martin Lawrence, where he's like, to me, I think that a lot of it was intentionally sort of what I wish was being played there, or something that could be a conversation starter, something that we could actually share. Because often going into those spaces, I see a lot of mockery of queerness and a lot of the things that are being played in those spaces. So thinking even of like Martin Lawrence or what's his name, Arsenio Hall, and there's sort of depictions of or appropriation of drag culture or queer culture and making it funny or a joke, as long as they still really actually identify as heterosexual in their day-to-day lives and present a sort of hyper-masculine appearance outside of that queerness as humor, as joke. And so I think that this was a way for me to sort of subvert some of that.
Do you feel your music choices change based on, the body of work that you're working on at a particular moment?
Yeah, sometimes I've gone through phases where I'm only listening to music that has no words, and it's sort of just, I don't know, sometimes I'll listen to classical music. I grew up playing classical music my entire life. And it does happen that way. Like sometimes certain music I can't focus if there's too many words. If I know all of the words to a song, I can't paint at all. I can't function. I get too wrapped up in that, and then I start like dancing around the studio and just having like a real moment, and then I leave and I'm like, what did I do? I just wasted like 6 hours. But this work, these were all the music that I listened to in the studio for this are all relatively new albums, all from this year actually. Or music that I was introduced to this year. So this is I think this is called Cut For Me, which is Kalela's first album, I believe. And then I listened to all of her music upwards, so there's like 3 paintings named after different things that she's written recently.
Okay. Do you listen to music?
I usually start with music, so while I'm stretching and gessoing, it's usually with rap music. And it goes from rap to, if I'm doing something physical, then I need, like house music or something like that. But when I'm painting, I can't listen to music anymore. I need something that's going to bring me inside. So it's usually podcasts or lectures on like behavioral biology or something on YouTube. Because I work 12 hours in the studio, I'm there by myself. And I feel like if I'm listening to music all day, I'm not learning anything. And I like to learn something every day. And so podcasts and, like classes at Stanford University, all those things kind of give me, because it gets awkward. You're there by yourself all day long and all your references are like, what Ira Glass said, or like, did you see the Criminal podcast? Or, I have no references at all that are normal because I don't have a water cooler and anybody standing around to talk to. So, but I find that just having somebody speaking in the background usually helps me focus. That if it's a story or something and it lasts for 2 hours, and I'm able to paint that whole time. And then when they stop, then my focus breaks and you have to find something else that's gonna like hold my attention.
So I'm really interested in how place affects both of your practices, both Baltimore and Pittsburgh. Sort of talked about it a little bit before with Hallie, but how that kind of influences what you're thinking and who you're showing in your work.
Yeah, the place is interesting to me because I made this work, and I don't think I would have made this body of work had I not been where I am right now. I grew up in Philadelphia, and so I had, growing up I had my uncle was a barber, and he would cut my hair all the time, and the only time I ever had to go to a barbershop was if he was out of town or for whatever weird reason, and so it really would disrupt that flow, and I felt immediately uncomfortable in those spaces. And I guess fast forward to now, and being in a city that's even, I mean a little bit further behind than Philadelphia, and even more removed from New York, I haven't had so many people come up to me and have so many questions about black barbershops elsewhere. And I think living in a place like New York or like Los Angeles or even Philly in some capacity, I find that access to queer-friendly spaces is much more present here than there is in smaller cities or literally like everywhere else. And I found that like really a stark contrast being in Pittsburgh, somewhere that's still, I mean it's a way smaller city than here, but it's and it's basically the Midwest, but it's still a city. It's the second biggest city in Pennsylvania next to Philadelphia, and to think of that as somewhere that still doesn't have spaces where I can get my hair cut and not feel like I have to perform a specific type of masculinity in order to not cause any discomfort for myself or others in that space is really bizarre. And so I think that's an experience that a large number of people have and share and can understand, and I think to sort of bring that to somewhere like New York or like Los Angeles and sort of decentralize or represent these other places that are, there's numerous places in the United States. It's a massive, massive country where even my experience is nowhere near what it must be in, like, I don't know, one of the states that I don't know where it is, like South Dakota. And I just think that it's important to bring some of that here and highlight that, because that's the lived experience that's shared by so many people.
For me, there's like 3 things that happened in my life that kind of brought me to that point, or to this. One was having to move back home when I was 30 years old to take care of family, and having to move back to Columbus, Georgia, which is like, it's a place that I don't have very many fond memories of, because I was born in '73, and it's still just quite a racist city. But having to live there again for 3 years and process who I was and process the moments of like my mother dropping me off for kindergarten and telling me how I needed to act because I was going to all-white schools. So how all the things kind of added up and got me really thinking about who I am outside of this context of being born there, being gendered, and then being a black woman, and then being told I'm a Christian, and then all these things that were kind of set up for me to believe and to be. So that meeting, moving to Baltimore City for the first time, and then coming from Atlanta, which is a city where there's a lot of black wealth, and every other car is a black person in a Range Rover, so you kind of get this idea that the world is becoming a better place. And then you move to Baltimore, and it's not a better place. In some neighborhoods it looks like a third world country. There's blocks and blocks of houses that are boarded up. There's lots of poverty there, and you begin to see that there's just no place for imagination in spaces like that. So I think over the course of moving there, moving back home, and then also going to New York in 2008 or 9 and seeing Kara Walker's exhibition at the Whitney Museum, her retrospective, and then leaving there, and then again carrying like what I just went through in Columbus, and then trying to figure out like what my contemporary black experience was and how I could express that. And this was also the same year that I had moved back from being at home for 3 years, and I hadn't really painted during that time, and I was trying to figure out what my artistic DNA was, like who I was going to be, and I knew the work that I was making in grad school was just not, it wasn't going to cut it. So I was really trying to think, like strategically think about if all these artists were in the room with me, like what would my conversation be like? And so it really brought me to this point of wanting to create these archetypes that existed outside of the, that were extricated from the historical narrative. Because my experiences growing up were being connected to a history that was connected to love and not always oppression and struggle. And I think that in Baltimore, it really influenced me too. And I'll say it, there's a quote by Gino Diaz when somebody asked him why he writes, and he said to make mirrors. So for me, it was to make reflections for these children that I work with that don't get to see these positive images of themselves at all.
And I think that's reflected in both of your bodies of work in terms of the sense of location and place. You know, the fact that in Amy work, there is no real location, like we can't locate the body in a specific place. And then Devan, you were also doing that in an earlier body of work where the backgrounds were more mysterious and kind of the figures were set within like a landscape that wasn't set in any way. And now with the Barbershop series, we're locating the body in a very specific place. So I don't know if you both want to kind of touch on that, how location and place plays a very specific role in the work itself.
Sure. With the other paintings that I've been doing that are more in a sort of ambiguous space, I like to think of the figures as functioning as more of like interdimensional travelers. They're kind of shamanistic characters that navigate from dimension to dimension. They're constantly in a state of flux. They're searching constantly. It's a fantastical space. So this is titled Constellation, and I did an entire series of these. I think it's about 6 feet. It's 6 feet tall by almost 7 feet, and there's a bunch of these paintings that I've made that show this kind of figure that's traveling through. I like to think of them as traveling through different stages of the sky. So when there's the black glitter creating this entire field over the canvas, I like to think of that as representative of the nighttime sky. And this is just the constellation that you don't see maybe during sunrise. And so I like to think of them as looking to a sort of greater space in which one can understand oneself. So historically, just thinking back into looking at Neanderthalic ways of understanding our purpose, looking to the sky, looking to nature, and trying to understand our place in the universe. And so having not grown up seeing a lot of images of queer black men, or not positive images certainly, or even looking at mythology and folklore, there's not a lot of stories told about them. And so I wanted to sort of create my own origin mythology of that. And so all of these figures are navigating through that sort of fictional space in which we look to sort of understand ourselves. As far as the barbershop paintings, moving into an actual realized space was, I think it was out of necessity. At a certain point I felt like I needed to ground them in reality but still maintain that element of magic. I wanted to start talking about, to sort of bring that into reality, bring some of those things actually into a recognizable, identifiable space and start hoping for things that could really feasibly happen. And so this project has actually opened up a little bit more, and it's more active in terms of I've actually talked to people that, in Pittsburgh, and specifically I've talked to the owner of the Kelly Strayhorn Theater, Janera Solomon, has been really wonderful, and she's actually working with me to introduce me to barbershops, because she started up some of the first Black-owned barbershops in Pittsburgh within the last 20 years. And so, she saw these paintings, we did a studio visit, and she was like, who are these people that are making this like oppressive space? Tell me, because I know their names and I'm going to go to them. And I was like, oh, relax, let's slow down. I never want to villainize those people, because and again, I never show the barber until it's myself cutting my own hair, but I think it was important for me to still think of this as me showing portraits of people. They're all crying, but it's more of a cathartic type of crying. They're able to actually decompress and relax and share their issues, and it's more of a positive type of crying that's happening. And so, I think that I just wanted to root it in some sort of tangible reality at some point. I thought it was necessary, and so now I'm actually, hopefully within the next year, going to be working on a more community-based printmaking project in which I'll be making print versions of these paintings with communities in predominantly Black communities in Pittsburgh, and bringing those prints into actual barbershops and starting a conversation to actually take action. And so I think that part of that comes out of the election and then this feeling of urgency and wanting to make an actual direct change and not feeling like I'm just sort of painting this fantasy. I want to make things actually happen.
I never really wanted my figures to be anywhere. And so like the speckled kind of, I call it liminal space that happens, it's something that I kind of fell into when I was in graduate school, and it was just something that I discovered that happened by accident, and it was a way for me to deal with the space without having to place them anywhere, because I feel like that really changes the context of who they are. And I also think that Black bodies are always placed inside of a context, so I didn't want to do the same thing, and I wanted them to exist almost as like saints in a way, like they could be religious relics or whatever, but they're pulled away from an experience that weighs them down, and the viewer has to confront them. I hang them, normally I hang them lower than they would normally be hung in a museum, so I like them hung about 8 inches, the top of the painting like 8 inches lower than it would normally be, so that when you approach the canvas, you're practically looking them in their eyes, and it's almost like being in a dark theater and somebody's, on a stage with a spotlight, and there's a monologue happening and you're there to experience it. But the eyes really, for me, tell all the story, and the background is not that important. And I have, in the future, there are paintings that I am placing objects inside of space, and so I think when I do make that transition, they're gonna be outside, but with very little. And there might be color planes, there might be grass and flowers, but it's still just gonna be sky or something like that, where it's a sense of openness.
I'm so interested in how you rarely show the entire body.
Yeah.
They're so often
Chopped off at the knees. Well, again, like everything I do, I'm a Virgo, everything I do is logical. So when I started these paintings, it was, again, like after I had moved back and I felt like I was behind in life. So I'm like, I need to think of a size that I can make where I can produce a large amount of work in a short amount of time. I was working 2 jobs, like trying to make this happen. And I needed a size that was mobile and also a size that wasn't offensively large that I knew could sell. That wouldn't be a storage problem, because I had other larger paintings that they're a storage problem until you sell them. And so all of these are 54 by 43, and they're that size because it's a size where the figure is still life size, and so it effectuates that emotion that I want them to elicit from the viewer. But they also fit in the back of an SUV, so I didn't have to rent a U-Haul. And it was just enough space. It's just enough space around the figure, and I just felt like it really worked. When I was trying to, suss out what I was going to do, the full figure wasn't as powerful to me as just this cropped image. So it just worked. Some things just work.
Devan, can you talk also about size in your work, because you've worked really large, and the barbershop paintings tend to be much more intimate and smaller in scale?
And the figures are much more.
I never work smaller than life size, so if the painting is small, then it's just a hand or it's just a face, whatever I can fit into that. So also kind of practical. I once made an entire show that could fit into my car, so I also have that same thing. These paintings, I think, because I started to contextualize them in an actualized space, I still wanted them to somehow have an element of superhuman, and so the paintings these are 36 by 48 inches, so 3 feet by 4 feet, but as you can tell, that's a much larger than life person, so I still wanted to have them have that element of magic imbued in them, even when not explicitly putting anything sort of mythological or putting them in an ambiguous space or anything like that. So that was really important to me. I've worked really large, and when I work really large, you'll see, like, if you see a full body, that full body is either my size or larger. And I think that it just, for me, it makes it so that way, once the painting is really large and you see a life-size figure in it, for me, I feel like I can enter that space and actually more easily feel like I can be immersed into somewhere, transported somewhere new and different, and I think that's really important. Scale of the figure is important to me. I'll never paint anything smaller than life size.
And can you talk a little bit about where you source your materials from? Because you have a lot of different materials in your work, and then Amy, the clothing choice is often very specific. So if the model, like the person themselves is not wearing it, like, do you actually go out and source clothing?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time shopping, which isn't fun for me. Because you need to be in the studio. It doesn't, like, finding the clothes doesn't feel like work, but it's part of the work. But there's certain things you do. You're like, I'm wasting my life right now. But you have to find what they're going to wear. So I usually, I'll collect items over time, and if I have the model to wear them, then they wear them, and if not, I'll wait until I find the right person that fits what I'm trying to say. But this dress was actually Kelly's dress, and then the figure before, the boy, he had on this outfit, except I changed a lot. So the t-shirt was exactly like that, but the sweatshirt and the shirt and his pants were different colors. I just didn't like the colors. They were red, blue, and gray, so they just didn't work. From the beginning of the body of work to now, I think it's changed a lot from being a little more fantastical to much more like an everyday look. Because I really started to look back at the paintings that inspired me, and that was a lot of American realism. And so I really wanted to create the sense of presenting these images of everyday Americans. And so now it makes it a lot easier, because I think I was also like stressed out about like finding the right costume or the right prop, or so I had to let go of that and just kind of like let them become what they were going to become. So I mean, sometimes somebody can walk in the room and they're exactly what I see in my head, like they exist in reality, and sometimes I have to marry both of them, or find I find the person and then I find the clothes.
I also spend a lot of time shopping, but I have more fun. I think, well, mainly because I think once I find the right thing, it's really exciting, and that's always an aha moment where almost like an entire painting clicks into my head, and I can actually visualize it, because I can actually think, like, this material, I can see the entire color palette, I can actually, literally will go onto my painting, and without it I can't make the painting at all.
Yeah.
So I think it's similar but also still different. And then I'm also really fortunate in thinking back on grad school, people loved to they knew I used objects and things like that, and would just like drop stuff off to me in my studio or leave it out for me. My partner's mother works for a jewelry company, and she'll give me all the broken stuff. And so a lot of people actually just give me a bunch of stuff too, which if anybody has any jewelry or fabrics that you don't want, let me know. I will take it all. So it's, yeah, I collect a lot. And I also don't always just make a mission when I go out to, like, I'm not always like, okay, I'm going out now to pick up a bunch of materials. I like to collect as I go. If I'm in New York, I'll walk around the fabric district and then go to Mood, find something really expensive and be like, okay, maybe I can find the same thing in one of these other stores. And I just kind of wander and collect.
I guess I'm really interested, you were just talking about American realism as being a source of inspiration, and I know you've also talked about Wes Anderson as being particularly influential to your practice. Are there other people or artists that you find inspirational in your stuff, or for starting painting?
The strange thing about I guess me, is that I didn't grow up looking at a lot of art. And I always have to say I graduated from my graduate school in 2004 not knowing who Kerry James Marshall was and not knowing who Barclay Hendricks was. And so then I started this body of work and I discovered these artists and I was like, oh man, you know. So I was influenced by, you know, European portrait painting, but then I really found myself when I started looking at daguerreotypes and I started looking at these photographs that were taken after the invention of the camera, when Black people, Black families started to become the author of our narratives, and the quietness of those portraits, the stiffness of the portraits, they really connected me to what I was doing, you know, because I found them after the fact too. I was just doing visual research and I came across Du Bois' exhibition in Paris, and we were, you know, practically on the same mission in a way. And then also Frederick Douglass, the same, you know, he photographed himself a lot and he felt like that image was more powerful than any kind of policy that was being made in changing the way that people felt about how we felt about ourselves and then how, you know, other people felt about Black people. So I think that's why I'm so connected to photography and then cinematography as well. I mean, I just really like the way Wes Anderson's, like every shot is a still, you can freeze it and it's like, it's perfectly composed. His palette is wonderful too. It's just, you know, so if he ever made a movie out of all my characters, that would be a dream come true. I think it'd be really cool. I think it'd be really cool.
What about you, Devan?
I love film. Wes Anderson, once you said that, I immediately looked at your paintings and I was like, oh, now I see like all the colors. I could just imagine that. I think with, I look a lot to photography and cinematography. I mean, I think with cinematography what's really great is I look at a lot of music videos, actually, contemporary music videos. I look at a lot of images of like nightclub settings and things like that. But like I think that those colors really, I even think about like how my paintings function in certain lighting conditions. And so in my show, I made sure I was like, we had to change these lights because they were all fluorescents. And so I thought it was really important for me to actually have the lighting condition be more favorable to like a drag queen. And thinking about this sort of like dimly lit room with the spotlight in order for everything to sort of refract. I like the idea of like for the work to sort of have a dazzling effect or to shift as the viewer moves around it. So in that same way in which film functions and sort of like thinking about experiencing my paintings in person and moving across the surface is really important to me. So I look at a lot of music videos. I think mostly more than when I think about my paintings, I think about them more in that context. As far as film goes, I mean, I loved actually your Frederick Douglass reference to that book compiled of all these portraits of him. I think is one of the most. I looked at that so much in grad school, looking at so many different iterations of himself in such powerful poses, and I think that really helped me when I was really parsing through why I was painting myself, my own image so many times and what I was trying to do, and have it not be narcissistic or about me so much, but about how, like what you were saying, how we feel about ourselves, and imagining a much more beautiful and powerful version of oneself to represent all of us at large. And I think that was really important to me. So I love that reference.
So I think now is a good time to take questions from the audience. We have a couple minutes.
Yeah. If you have a question, just shoot your hand up.
Hi. Hello. This question is for Devan. I see that you use snakes or serpents a lot. Does that have any particular meaning to you, or is it a symbol that you resonate with in some way?
So the snakes have like sort of like a trifold meaning, I guess. I mean, a lot of people approach it and think of the serpent as phallus, which is certainly a welcome interpretation of it within this context. In terms of like thinking of different mythological versions of the snake, or I guess you could say religious versions of it, I think in Western mythology or religious studies in Catholicism, it's sort of been extrapolated from what it originally maybe wasn't intended as this sort of magical thing. Thinking of how religion shifted in the Fertile Crescent, the snake became villainized as something mysterious and misunderstood. And so now, so many people, I mean, I still have people come up to me and ask me if they're interested in buying a painting, and then they'll say, oh, but can you make the same one but without the snake? I'm terrified of snakes. And I'm always like, well, no, I mean, that's the whole painting. And so I think that sort of misconception exactly mirrors the misconception about Black masculinity, how it's often viewed and villainized without even understanding so many complex layers of what that might be upon just viewing something like that. It causes an immediate reaction. I've had moments where just walking down the street and having somebody rush forward, or they're uncomfortable, or being viewed maybe too intimately or too closely when shopping, or all these different things projected onto me. And I felt like in these paintings, the snakes are never necessarily like attacking the Black male. They're always sort of in harmony. They have a symbiotic relationship in these paintings. They have a mutual understanding.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
You're far away, 1 second.
Oh, I can just yell.
Okay.
For Amy, I was wondering, you said the images are at the eye level in the gallery space, and I wanted to know if you paint them at the same perspective, them in your eye, or if that's something you recreate after the fact, and if the clothes are standing up when you paint them, and she stays standing for the face, or is this like a collage of face, beautiful? How do you spend so much time with the subjects is what I'm really wondering, and they look so alive.
While I'm painting them or while I'm photographing them?
Oh. There it is. I came in late with my sons from a dance class. I think I missed that sentence. Thank you for filling it in.
Okay.
On the ground. But for Devan, you spoke about how it's really important for you in the context of the barbershops for you to notate and kind of record the images that you used to paint. And you spoke about in the future taking those same images and placing them back into the context in future work. My question would be, how do you feel about now taking an object that once recorded something that you felt significant to place it back into the context in which it originated?
So you mean like these images of people in the barbershop, and then putting them back into a new version of that? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a little new for me to be doing that, but putting them back into this context, even when I'm doing this, everything about these figures is totally hybridized, or it's like almost like I take an image of, let's say, this boy, right? He didn't look exactly like this. He has a different haircut. I changed his nose slightly. It looks actually more like my nose. So I do sort of shift things and edit them and change them, but I also do the same thing to the spaces that they're in. So that barbershop behind him is an amalgamation of 3 different barbershops that I've been to. One of them that I remember from that I first cried in when I was a child getting my hair cut, because I felt like the clippers hurt, and being reprimanded in that space. And then that's where the wood paneling, that wood grain is from. The poster is from a barbershop that I go to now that I saw a child crying in and getting reprimanded from. So it's all this sort of like, all these paintings are kind of like a melting pot of a number of spaces and people. So for me, it's through that mixing and reinterpreting, it creates a new space.
I have a question for Amy. First, congratulations on being selected to do the portrait for Michelle Obama. The how do you get selected to do that? That's the first part. And the second part is, what will she be wearing? Like, which Michelle Obama
The process was a field trip that Malia and her class took to the National Portrait Gallery, and she saw the painting and she went home and told her mom about it. And then they called me to the White House to interview me, along with other artists, and then she decided she liked me for something. I'm kidding. And we went through a process of sifting through dresses, and I can't really describe the dress, but it's just a really beautiful dress, and her beautiful arms are showing, I'll tell you that.
Was there a question up here on the left?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's any secrets you can spill.
When will the painting be unveiled?
In February, yeah, mid-February. So you don't have too long to wait.
Hi, this is a question for Devan. I'm curious about what you said about having moved from self-portraiture, being less about narcissism and more about how you feel about yourself, how we feel about ourselves. So I'm interested in how you confronted the kind of limitations of reflecting directly on the self and how you opened up possibilities for yourself, both formally and personally, in the work to move forward.
That process was really tricky for me because I had to figure out a way to do it, because I don't like just going up to street. The new body of work is not a place in which I feel comfortable going and talking to people and describing this whole body of work and saying, I'm I'm going to paint you and it's going to be in this context of all gay black men, So I think that can sort of be a really not the ideal space to do it in, the space that I'm sort of critiquing. And so I think that's how I approached it. As I thought about it as I want to create new people that I feel like I can identify with and that other people can, and maybe this can be a way for me to start a dialogue. And so when I had my opening, there were so many young black men there that identified in the same way and identified with the work, and so I think that in a way it sort of opened it up for me to actually, possibly if I wanted to, have more access to more people that identify that way. So it's sort of like a way for a little bridge to bridge that gap and to access people who want to be represented this way. So these are all fictional people. It was important for me to also open it up in terms of thinking, and I mentioned this before, about trying to actually make some sort of change, even if it's minute. Reaching out to people, starting conversations, starting a dialogue, and I have to reach outside of myself in order to do that a lot more. And so it was really important for me to not use, so some, of course I said I painted friends of mine, people who feel comfortable identifying in that capacity, but I didn't want to just paint friends of mine. I wanted to reach out, build a community, really bring people together in order to start this dialogue, and then even start a dialogue with barbershops that maybe normally don't realize that they're not creating a safe space for queer black men, because I think it's really important to, if you're going to have a space in which black men convene to decompress and to talk about all these issues and just to be candid with each other, you have to, I want it to be open to all black men and for all of us to unite together, and I think that's, I think that urgency to do that forced me to look outside of my own body.
Hi, Amy. Can you guys hear me? Your portraits have this stillness about them. Is it possible to expound a bit more, about the idea of activating this idea of representation within them? You spoke about the exposition of Du Bois and Frederick Douglass in terms of representations of people of color. Can you speak a bit more about that?
It's really about visibility. And I also think that, so those images of Du Bois were also about respectability politics. But even within that, I found that there's still a performance for acceptance, which is disheartening. And I still feel the same way about these, because even though I didn't want these to be about race necessarily. Obviously they are, because there are Black bodies on the campus. But I mean, to be human is to be visible, and I mean, representation is a part of how we, you know, give ourselves to the world. I mean, even the way that you do it. I mean, your presence and the presence of these portraits in museum institutions change people's expectations of what they expect to see. Just like the presence of him in a barbershop. I'm assuming you went to sit in a barbershop like that, completely probably changed the whole vibe of the barbershop the whole time you were there, right? Am I answering your question?
Yes.
But is there anything else? Okay. Was there someone else? Yeah.
Amy, you mentioned that you didn't see very much art when you were growing up. How did you know, when did you know you wanted to be an artist, and what did you do when you realized that?
I knew from the time that I was a young child, but I really couldn't act on it because my mother didn't want me to be an artist. So when I graduated from high school, my father was a dentist. He was still working. No, he wasn't working at the time. He retired because he got sick. But I was working at an internal medicine office of a doctor, and I was pre-med up until I was a junior. So I transferred out of my local city college to Clark, Atlanta, and then I was far enough away from my parents that I could start to make my own decisions. But it's something that I've always wanted to do. And I feel like exposure to art or not, I still would be here. It's just who I am. And these people, these images are things that I needed to work out. It's like a personal diary or a journal. And it's really about painting the things that I want to see in the world. It's about creating a place of rest for people to come look at, whether you're Black or white, but specifically I think for Black people, to come into a museum space and to see, somebody that looks like your grandmother, somebody that looks like your grandfather, your granddaughter. Like, I think those things are really important. I think they're what I did not get to see every time I did go to a museum. And so, yeah, I have no idea how I made it here without all of that, because I didn't even come to New York for the first time until I was 28. So I went to the museum once when I was in the 6th grade, and I went once in college for an assignment. And I'm still, so it's just like it sounds like magical thinking, but I feel like I was born to do it. Like the work was there to be made through, I guess, the life that I was going to be living.
I have 2 questions, but I think maybe it could come in the form of one answer. My first question is, are there any no-nos in your work? Like, oh, no, I don't paint that, or like, I don't add that into my work? And what are you excited for next, like, to explore in your work? It's like, you both have like found your niches so well, and you're very accomplished. I know from the inside it's like, yeah, but I can do more, but from the outside it's like, whoa, So like, what are you excited for next in your work, and then what don't you do? And is what you don't do what you're excited about in your work next, or whatever?
Yeah. I don't think I have any rules, which is weird to say, because I give myself a lot of rules. But one thing I that I didn't do was make the background a flat color, and I felt like got over that hurdle. But what I'm looking forward to, I think, is making larger paintings with more people, which is something I couldn't do a few years ago because it's just too expensive. And finding 8 people, and then giving them $100 each to show up to your house and making them want to be there and finding the clothes, like all that, felt a little overwhelming with like the budget that I had at the time. You know what I mean? So I feel like the more successful I am, the more I can really, develop my ideas and make these larger pieces that I want to make, where there's an exchange between characters. There's a more complex narrative that's happening. So I'm excited about those.
I sort of, the only no-no I have is like I don't paint smaller than life size.
Yeah, that's a no-no.
Other than that, every time I've said that I don't do something, like I was like, oh, I'm never using glitter in mine. And so, it ends up happening, or like, oh, I only paint self-portraits, and now I have a whole show. So every time I put a rule on something, I break it like immediately. So I think it's
never.
Yeah.
Never say never.
We probably have time for about one more question. Okay, 2 more questions.
So I'm curious more about your community of artists, if you find a really supportive network of other artists that you're working with. Are you reaching out for critiques or trying to be part of a larger conversation, or do you find your work to be more independent?
For me, I'm really thankful. I mean, I have a bunch of my community is here, people that I went to school with, which is really amazing to see us supporting each other. And me not living here, I try to come up and go to as many shows as I can that friends of mine are having. And so my community is partially remote, but as far as my Pittsburgh community, I teach. And so it's maybe a little bit easier for me to access people, or for me to be visible at least as an artist, as a local artist. And so being involved in an institution, and then, I help organize lecture series and things like that. I'm constantly meeting people, so I'm really fortunate to have a really wide net that's cast. So I don't think that's necessarily the case for so many other people, but I'm really fortunate to have access to so many different artists. And so I do, as far as studio visits go, I've done a lot of virtual studio visits, like over Skype. I've done a lot of studio visits in person when people are coming through town, so it definitely does happen. It's all timing with that.
Very similar for me. I mean, I'm in Baltimore, which is a small city, and I have a small group of friends too. It's just like, I guess, how I am. And I am a part of a larger community. Like, I really don't get a sense of that until like maybe I go to a Black Artist Retreat and we're at the Astor Gates and like everybody's there and you're like, yeah, like this is what I do, and it just feels really good because you feel like you're connected. But painting is really insular, and so I do spend a lot of time on myself. But I have 2 people that if I need, to make a decision about my work or what I'm doing, I'm always like texting them, what do you think about this, and I really don't get a lot of studio visits anymore. Like, people come by, they want to talk about the work, but I don't think it's like, it's more just, they just want to come hang out or like impress their girlfriend and bring it by an artist studio or something like that. That happens a lot, you'd be surprised. But I do feel like I'm a part of the community. And then Micah is there, and I'm at the school this year, and I keep a lot of the kids that I work with around me all the time, and I'm always having them come into the studio and just checking on them, making sure that they're good. Because school is hard. Our school is hard. They're paying a lot of money. You know what I mean? So I'm like, we have to make a plan about what you're gonna do when you get out of school. So I try to stay connected, but I'm also an introvert, and I like being alone too. Like, I love my own company way too much. So I mean, I have to work at like maintaining connections sometimes.
Hi, this question is for both of you. When are you motivated creatively by just what inspires you personally, or do you ever feel a sense of there having to be some type of social commentary that you make in your work, or is it just purely just what inspires you?
Well, with mine, I mean, for a while, I kind of just, I'm really interested in beauty, and I just love painting because of that. I think so much about painting for me is about beauty. I think we're highly visual creatures, and that we are attracted to looking at things that satisfy something. And so I think that was largely part of it. That's why I use certain colors. As you can see, there's certain go-to colors that I have, definitely. But as far as social change, I mean, sometimes like something externally will spark something in me that maybe starts an idea or fuels an idea, and it starts to cultivate my mind, and I have to like sort of parse through it through drawing or sketching or I do a lot of printmaking. So a lot of my ideas and things like that come out of conversations and interactions with people. So it's maybe not inspired by this need to do social change, but I think that inherently in making art, I think that a lot of, like, so many artists that I know are, through what they're doing, they're activists in a way. And so I think that, I don't know, I think they're sort of linked or tethered.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're tethered because of who we are. I think because we're Black people, and despite our successes, we can look around us, especially me in Baltimore, and I can see that there are people out there that aren't doing as well as me and that aren't presented with the same opportunities. So for me, I don't think the impetus of the work wasn't about social change at all. It's really about a creative process, and it's about what's beautiful, it's about what colors look good, it's about, this object that I'm making. But they exist in the world in a different way. And I oftentimes get a lot of emails from teachers who use my portraits in their classes to teach about portraiture, especially when they're in schools where there's a large demographic of brown and Black kids. And so I feel like the work does do a lot of work for that reason. And for me, that has become a source of inspiration. So painting is great. Making money is great too. But I think I'm not really satisfied until I feel like I'm going to do something that's going to create some change in the world outside of, these being in a public space, really, creating enough wealth with the work that I can, because wealth is power, right? I mean, Donald Trump is president because he's rich. So just really approaching it that way for me has become really important. So I don't consider myself an activist. I do a lot of volunteer work, volunteered in jails, and I work with youth all the time because I feel like it's a responsibility, that we should all try to reach out and help each other one at a time. But so I mean, it's an inspiration for me just to get really wealthy and start organizations and foundations that can do the work that we need to have done.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Devan and Amy. And also, Hallie, thank you so much for leading us in conversation. So, we have a little over half an hour before the museum closes. So let's go up to the galleries and see their work. All right, thanks for coming out. Bye.